Okay.
We all set? I'd like to call this meeting to order. Our attendees are remotely are Maureen Sullivan and Nina Lenz, who unfortunately is quarantined this week. We have in the room Sean from Clarence, Kip Roberson, Grace Robertson, Dale Barber, and Peter Stalker. I remind the public that this is a working session of the board, so no public comment will be taken. You are welcome to listen to our entire presentation as it's a working session. This is the first of two that have been scheduled. Would you please mute your own audio and your own video so that, you're welcome to hear us for the entire meeting. The purpose of this meeting is, as part of our continual professionalization of our board and our library operations, the board felt it was conducive to all of us to continue to have some training, which will result in a document that will hopefully in perpetuity record what we're coming to, what our conclusions are from these sessions. And will be a reference for not only for this board, but for future boards and their directors. We're concentrating in this first session on delineating specifically the roles and responsibilities of the library board, the library director, as outlined not only in the Wyoming statutes, but also in best practices from the American Library Association and others. And with that, since Maureen is really leading this session, I will turn it over to Maureen.
Great. It's really a privilege to have this opportunity to work with all of you again, particularly at what I think of as a very important time in the work of the library, but also the work of the library board. And before we get into the discussion, as Peter has just described, I put on the agenda for this session a few moments for me to share with you what I propose to be some guidelines for our work. And I'm going to go through these guidelines. They're ones that I have developed because I think they really help a group such as yours get the most out of a session like this one. But when I'm finished going through my list, I will stop and test with all of you whether I have the right list, if there's anything that you want to suggest as a change, but also if there's anything that you might want to add, because I'll be looking for your agreement to follow these guidelines as we engage in this work today. And they're the same guidelines that I will propose when we reconvene on the 29th. So the first thing, and I almost hesitate to say this to all of you because you've been so great in the work that you've done, speaking up and participating, but in a session like this, it's really important for each of you to share your thinking and contribute to the discussion. As any one of us is speaking, it's important for others to listen and to listen to understand, but also to really listen to what it is that our colleagues are saying. And the listening is important because of the third item on my list, and that is, and the way I usually put this is to recognize that anytime two or more of us come together, we're bound to experience difference. And those differences can enrich the work and the conversation. So my third item is for all of us to expect those differences to emerge and for us to commit to work through them. And I think that's one of the reasons why you've asked me to be the facilitator here. Part of my job is to help surface the differences and work through those differences, because especially when it is a board that is convening, as you are this afternoon, it's critical for the conversation to be one in which you are open and you see where the differences are, but you work to seek areas of agreement. Because as I'm sure all of you are well aware, the power of the board is when you're seated together. Your work happens when you are together. So that becomes very important. It's also critical for us this afternoon to focus on the future. And there's been a whole series of experiences, and certainly a set of them as I've worked with you since March, where there have been challenges, and you're going to continue to face those challenges. But the more we can focus on understanding how it is that you can best work together in your collaboration as the library board, the more effective you will be, and therefore the more effective the library will be in serving its community. And particularly for a board, one of the most important things to understand and act on is that you as the board need to do this work together, and to recognize that what we're doing in this afternoon session, and we'll come back to this when we reconvene in a couple of weeks, is really laying the foundation for all of your work to happen as a cohesive group. So as I've gone through that, have I missed anything? Does anyone have anything you would want to add to the list?
I'm happy, Marie.
That's good. So now I have to ask the follow-up question. Are all of you?
One second. Nina, is it possible for you to put your video on?
I told Maureen I'm eating. When I'm done, I will turn it on, I
Yeah.
promise.
Okay.
That happened before I think all of you were there. And is it possible, since we're pausing for a moment, is it possible for me to see the full group rather than myself on the screen?
We could ask. You can pin our video.
Okay, it's happening now, but maybe that's because you were speaking. Anyway, I want to test for agreement on the part of all of you to follow this guidance, where you're going to participate, you'll listen, we'll work through differences, we'll focus on the future, and we're acting for, or you are acting for, the board as a whole.
Agreed. Yes. Yes.
Terrific. So to get us started in looking at making sure that we have a shared understanding of the different responsibilities, let's look at the document that Kip prepared, but I worked with him to prepare this, that lays out the responsibilities of the library director and the board in 7 different areas. And I want us to walk through this so that you have an opportunity, each of you has the opportunity to raise questions or make comments, but you also, when we've gone all the way through this, will be in a good position to declare your agreement to follow this understanding, or the understanding that is represented here. So does everyone have it?
Yeah.
So before we go into this, I thought it would be helpful for me to say, I sometimes am asked how I distinguish the work of the library director from the work of the library board. And I think the most important understanding is the board's work is governance, the library director's work is administration. So with that as a foundation, when we look at what we've described here under general administrative, is the distinction here clear, where we're describing the library director as administering the daily operation of the library, all of the functions within the library, being in the role of an advisor to the board, and also recognizing the important role of the director in providing support to the Friends Foundation and any community groups. Whereas the board's role is to recruit and hire a qualified director, maintain an ongoing performance appraisal process, and to ensure full support for the director. And I can say here, as he carries out his responsibilities. Are there questions or any discussion that you might want to have on this aspect of the work?
I'm wondering what state and local guidelines pertain to the director's performance. I'm not aware of anything that addresses that. Could you tell us what that means?
Kip, can you respond to this?
Sort of not. There may be county guidelines for performance appraisal. My past experiences, it was sort of left to the board to decide how the performance appraisal looked. So I honestly don't know the exact answer for as it pertains to us.
Okay, in the past, when we did it, I wasn't aware of any county, and I think we did a look for it. But we can certainly look at it, but I've not seen them in the past, so I'm not sure there's anything out there that I just.
We do have, for other employees in the library at least, a performance appraisal form.
Or a form.
Yeah, there is a form. There, I don't think we've traditionally used it for the
It's-
library director, but we could certainly take a look at it. But
It's-
there's not anything in the statutes,
No.
as far as I'm aware.
And there's nothing locally that I know of.
And Grace, are you raising this because you want to be sure that everybody's clear about what those might be?
Well, we're close to going into performance process, and I want to make sure if there's something out there that we need to be following, that we're following it.
Yeah, that's why I asked my question.
Or anything about it in the past, but we'll look into a form.
I will take that, I will look into that as soon as we're done with this session.
Right.
Great. And I would suggest, Peter, that anything that we learn subsequent to this session, we can bring back to the board when we meet again. In what I think is a little bit more than 2 weeks.
Correct.
And that's exactly what I'm looking for, Grace and others, as we go through this. If there's anything here that you want more explanation about or have a question about, ask us. So anything else about general administrative? And a key area for any board is ensuring effective policies. So here what we're describing is the library director keeps the board apprised of the need for new policies or revisions in current policy. And the library director has the lead responsibility in ensuring effective implementation of the policies that have been adopted by the board. And then, of course, the board then has the responsibility to identify and adopt written policies to govern the operation and program of the library. This is at the heart of the governance role of the board. Discussion about this aspect.
Yes, Maureen.
Peter?
I want to just be crystal clear on this. Generally, almost without exception, presumably, policies would be presented to the board by the director, who is either gathering them from his staff or on his own. And we are to discuss and question and analyze those policies and decide whether we agree or not agree. But is it the opposite, where we have ideas that really is not something that gets pushed down to the director? Is that correct? In terms of policy?
So I would, if I've understood you correctly, I think what you're asking is if the need for a policy arises first in the board, you wouldn't necessarily push that down to the director for development of the policy?
I'm just curious, is normally policies come up from the director to the board,
Right.
as opposed to the other way around?
Right. And that is the practice in most libraries, most organizations that have a board like yours with policy responsibility, because the need is usually identified through the daily operations and the administration of the library. So if a need for a new policy arose in the board, I would presume the board would immediately involve the director. And are you thinking, Peter, that we want to be clear about that in this document?
I think there are areas of a Venn diagram with intersection of responsibilities. And to the extent that we can delineate who's generally responsible and what the exceptions might be, I think for posterity, that can be helpful. And I realize that one can't identify all the possible situations one can come into,
Right.
come up with, but I'm just trying to set what's normal precedent.
That's great. And what's already happening so early in this work session this afternoon is you're really, through the points you're making this a document that will be both the board and the director's working document. So this is great. I've made a note and I know we're recording this session, so we'll be able to capture that. Other discussion on policy.
I just would like to say, as I've worked with this a little bit, sometimes we think about policy as just the documented library formal policy, but our mask policy is policy. There are ongoing operational policies that come up. So when we talk about policies, I think we're talking about both that 30-some library policies plus the ongoing policies that occur as we do business throughout the year. And I think the mask is one of the easiest policies to discuss there. So that doesn't go into our formal list of policies. It just goes into the director.
Right, and we also have a good number of county HR policies that the board has adopted.
Yeah.
So those are not under our purview necessarily. I don't know, I guess that should be noted.
Yes, I'm glad you brought that up. Yes. We adopted that in one meeting and then we just did that one on.
Yeah.
It's really the whole policy that we adopted.
Great. Any other discussion on policy?
I have a question. It's sort of policy. And I admittedly have not read in detail the board handbook that we have developed or Grace has developed, or Dale, everybody. Does the board need a set of official bylaws that they operate under, and are those in that handbook?
They are,
Okay.
yeah, they are.
And sort of like the policy too. Our bylaws are very brief.
Bylaws for a board are critically important.
That's-
Anything else on policy before we move to planning? So as you read the description here of the distinctive responsibilities, what comments does that bring forth?
Well, just the one that I think we've been wrestling with in the last 8 weeks, which is we have a new director. And that director's inherited a strategic plan that clearly he did not have any input in. And so there are transitional times where, such as the one we're in, where we may have a scheduled update of these plans, but it may need to be less rigorous because I think it doesn't behoove a director to inherit a strategic plan without buying into that plan and being able to modify it based on what he or she is finding after a suitable period of time, but not too long, for finding out what the day-to-day situation is like here. So again, in just sort of documenting these things, having some of that flexibility for these transitory times is important. And there is a role that probably would be more board-oriented right now in terms of helping Kip to understand what our strategic plan is and why this is going on until he feels it's time to say, well, wait a minute, this is kind of outdated. This is what I'd like to put onto this, and then developing a new strategic plan. So I just, again, it's that how we document this is important, I think.
And this is really an important piece, Peter. So, and I'm sure you want to do this as well. I want to just check in with your colleagues on the board. What are your thoughts in response to what Peter has just suggested?
I don't understand it. I don't understand what you said, Peter. The new director shouldn't have to inherit and adhere to an existing plan without input. Is that your point?
It's not so categorical as that, Grace. It's, if we wrote a plan in 2015 and we now have a new director in 2021, many aspects of that plan, which has not been reviewed and revised, are probably dated and are no longer relevant. And instead of waiting until Kip, Kip needs to put his imprimatur on it, but it strikes me as we have a very challenging set of performance objectives for Kip in this first year, because we're asking him to accept a strategic plan that we're going to hold him to for his performance that may or may not be relevant. And so I'm talking about, what do you do in transitionary times like this? And giving him enough time to take a look at what the operating plan is right now and say, this is no longer relevant, or this is less relevant than it was when it was written in 2015. He should be able to massage our current strategic plan to the extent that it makes sense today, until he's ready to lead an effort at revising it for a completely new strategic plan. That's the point I make. That's my belief, and it's just my individual.
And I want to give an opportunity for Dale and Sean and Nina to chime in before Kip giving you an opportunity to say what your thinking is on this. Dale, Sean, or Nina?
I would jump in quickly. This is Sean. In this document, I'm seeing coordination, implementation, and evaluation, but I'm not seeing explicitly development, and wondering if that is something that should be stated, really with whom specifically that responsibility lies.
And the first place where we can consider that question is with the strategic planning, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Dale or Nina, anything to add?
I actually think that it might make more practical sense for the director, particularly a new director, because what Peter said, and I know you didn't mean it this way, Peter, sounded like an enormous amount of work for the director. And I think it might make more sense for the director as he's simply working through some of his progress, his projects, and with the staff, and as things go along, if he runs across, and of course, we're all aware of the strategic plan, and we have a good strategic plan. I think it probably is outdated, but not all of it. And that it would be more helpful for him as he runs across a real bump to maybe bring that to all of our attention, so that we could, have it in the back of our minds as we go forward. The other thing I think all of us really need to be thinking about in terms of any strategic plan process, regardless of when we do it, is what is going to be the best way to do it, given the circumstances we find ourselves in. We are not able to, in the past, we've had a lot of in-person focus groups. We've had people be able to come into the library and fill out forms or give their opinion on site. I think there's a big value to a lot of that. So part of what we may want to really be thinking about is timing. If we get to a space where we are freer to come back out again, that may be the time where we do certain parts of the strategic plan to take advantage of that. Because I, for one, don't believe this thing is going to go away. So I think we need to be poised to do the parts that we feel are really important in person and then pull back, as well as also having this opportunity online, because there have always been people that couldn't come out of their house before this that would like to participate. So I think we need to go forward with that also.
I think neither the strategic plan nor COVID is going to go away anytime soon.
No, I don't either. Yeah.
Yeah, you captured my intent, but I don't want Kip to go through line by line.
Yeah, I don't want to. Yeah.
No, it's the extent that.
It's one page. The strategic plan is one page of goals and objectives.
Well, there's a lot to it.
There's a
Oh,
lot.
yeah, there's a lot more
There's a lot
to it, but most of what backs up that one page of goals and all, that is obsolete. But Dale, I like your idea of doing that, maybe chunks.
Mhm.
Is that what you were suggesting?
Yeah, take advantage of,
Pieces of it?
maybe we can get people to come back out again, if we get out of this red zone, and, when we get ready, I'm not proposing a timeline. But when we get ready, that we take advantage of, if it gets better and we can come out, we do it then. And then if we have to pull back, which I suspect we will, and that's a logistical part of the strategic plan, but since we're talking about it, I just wanted to get it in there.
I will add that I am signed up for a webinar through every library on Thursday that's strategic planning in a post-COVID world.
Aha.
And so,
Very
very
sounds
timely.
optimistic.
Well, I know we should drop the post part, but.
Yeah.
So Kip, I want to come back to you, but I also want to give Nina a chance. Is there anything you want to add at this point, Nina?
Well, I guess I'm struck in this conversation about whether the board is trying to coordinate and implement the strategic plan right now. And where this is where I see things getting a little fuzzy. So, for me, I see my role as having Kip tell us what the library is doing and how that coordinates with the strategic plan, and sort of saying yes or no, we agree with that, and not leaving it more to Kip to decide how he views the plan and how he wants to implement it, and then bring that plan to us. So those are my thoughts hearing the discussion right now. I will say, in my many conversations that I had with the community, the strategic plan was the place where people felt, or what I heard, people felt that was getting lost because each director interpreted it differently. And so, however the board could help the director have consistency, I think that could be a part of our role, and not delving into the hows and the whys, the hows or the whats, I guess, and talk more about the why. So
a nice bridge to giving Kip a chance to say what he's thinking about how this might work.
My initial thoughts are that there is a lot of valuable pieces still relevant in the current strategic plan. We are certainly in a different place than we were in 2016 or 2015. COVID and then all of our local issues that are problematic for us. What I was thinking is that the management team and I should sit down with the strategic plan, pick out what are relevant pieces that are doable or achievable over the course of the next year, develop something based on the strategic plan that's sort of a short-term strategic direction or something that we can work on for the next year while we are simultaneously working on the new strategic plan. We need something that will guide us for the next several months. And we certainly have pieces of the existing plan that are relevant still. So that's sort of where I'm at. Everybody else been talking about community input and everything. That certainly comes with the new strategic plan. The existing one already had this community input. So I don't think we want to get bogged down in trying to redo that.
But if we bring this back to the level of clarification, what your responsibility is as the director and what the board's responsibility is, one suggestion, and I'm just picking up on what Sean had said earlier, you might want to add develop, coordinate, and implement a strategic plan where you continue to see that the board's role is to ensure that the strategic plan is developed and that it has implementation and evaluation components. That was your intent, if I understood correctly, Sean?
Yes, correct.
Yeah, I'm definitely with Nina's perspective, which is, I view our role as advice and counsel to the director. And that almost everything that's significant has to come from the director to us. And our role is to challenge what he, in Kip's case, is presenting to us by asking a lot of what might seem to be stupid questions by which we can help him think about things in somewhat different perspective that he might bring to the table normally. But in the end, we're really here to give him advice, counsel. We have a fiduciary duty to all of our constituents on the finances of the library. And we have a hire and fire and performance oversight on the director. But that's my view, the limits of kind of what we do. And I would love to have this be an easier job for board members to be able to sign up for, because the director's a professional running things, and we're there to basically challenge that thinking in a constructive way and not create things for that could be potential headaches for that director. I think it'll make it easier to find, as talented a group of board members as we have now.
And when you started these remarks, you were giving us a chance to move into fiscal, but I want to make sure we're ready for that before we do. Was it Dale?
Yeah, I think, that one of the important jobs of the board is to be advocates, and that we are advocates for the people who can't be here in the board meetings too. The community, our friends and neighbors, who also include our staff. I mean, we're all part of a larger group. And so in that role, I don't think it's inappropriate to bring ideas that you've either thought of or you've heard as part of your advocacy role to the meetings or any kind of meetings, or to the director, or, to be, to not just totally depend on the director, because he is one person. We can't clone him, or we haven't figured out how to do it yet. And that part of our job is to hear that input too from the community and to be a conduit of sorts. So I just don't want us to forget the bigger picture. It's not just the director and the library board by any means. And I think it's very important for the board, since we are multiple people, to keep bringing that viewpoint in and sharing it and, see what happens. I mean, it's a process. So I just think that's really important.
And I've made a note, because Dale, when we get to advocacy, I'd like to come back to this point that you're making, because I think it will be really important to have a strong shared understanding among all of you about how that advocacy work happens. So are there other comments, Peter?
I just wanted to, so Dale, in your mind, do you distinguish between, I distinguish between when we have a formal meeting, that there are it's a more formalistic and process-oriented thing. And we are also informal communication conduits into KIP through our emails and I differentiate that, and maybe that's something that should be differentiated in my head between what goes on at a board meeting, which is obviously very transparent to the public, and I want everything we do to be transparent. But I had a conversation with Mrs. McGillicuddy on the sidewalk yesterday, and she said, I really need to see this kind of stuff in the library. That I, in my view, would be a much more informal note to Kip. Can you put this into your thinking cap about what's going on? Do you make that differentiation? I make that differentiation, and maybe that's a mistake.
You know, I really don't, because I think the library board meetings are, for a lot of people, the only opportunity they have to hear what's going on and to provide input. You know, so that I would think it was more, that we would do more of those kinds of things both places. I'm not saying that we don't have a certain amount of input that occurs in a different kind of meeting, a public meeting, obviously, but maybe a specific working meeting on the strategic plan. You know, we tell people ahead of time, this is what we're doing, we want you to come and help us. This is the outline, you know, we need your help. But it's one reason I advocated for putting matters from board and staff on the agenda, because I felt like sometimes things pop up in the meeting, either from the public or from the board, that then there was no mechanism to get a discussion going about it. So I would just have a little softer view, I think, Peter, is all I would say.
So I'm going to propose that we've reached a point in this discussion where there's a critical issue in front of you. And I'll try to describe it. And then I want you to chime in on this. So I'm going off the agenda a little bit here, but I think this is at the heart of your ability to work well in the future. The board meetings are where your work needs to happen. And as you're pointing out, Peter, they need to be very transparent. People in the community have the opportunity to come in and listen and understand what's happening. When you start talking about informal conversation, and I probably have the wrong name, but Mrs. McGill taking somebody aside and saying, this is something I'd like to see, that is one person in the community. And I think you want to be very careful about any actions that are taken on that basis. And what I'm going to propose to you is, I think you need to have a very firm understanding that your work happens together when you're in those formal meetings, and that you need to look at how it is that you're going to make sure the community understands what you're doing. You make the notes of the meetings available. People have the opportunity to come in and observe those meetings, but to be very careful about any conversations that are taking place outside of those board meetings that might lead to action. I think there's a really important need here to be very clear. And having said that, I'm wondering what some of you are thinking.
I'm thinking it's not clear. Because it's a small town. You're gonna go to the grocery store, you're gonna go to the gas station. People are gonna talk to you. They're gonna talk to you about issues. Now, I agree, it's not a direct conduit from the gas station to the board meeting, you know, but I think it's important somehow for the board and the director. And maybe this is through other meetings, like we've already talked about, in terms of the logistical part, in terms of having specific community-oriented meetings so that people can come there and make those kinds of comments. And if that's an ongoing goal for us, I think it would be helpful for us to be able to say to people at the gas station and the grocery store, you know what, I want you to hold that thought, because we are going to have community meetings about this issue. If it's something that it's possible to say that about, the strategic plan is a perfect example. Because I don't think you want to just cut people off, and or it falls into a black hole when they're giving you this information. There's got to be some realistic manner to be responsive and bring it forward in a way that's appropriate.
So the practice that I've observed in other situations that gets at your point, Dale, is if I'm the board member at the gas station in a conversation with someone and they bring up a matter, I then communicate that to my colleagues on the board, and the director is also someone who receives this information, so that you're all able to monitor what some of the needs and concerns are, and you can determine when a need or a concern arises that is going to cause you to make this an issue that you need to pursue. Does that make sense?
I mean, we do have a public comment mechanism built into our meetings themselves. So if Mrs. McGillicuddy comes up and says, oh, I have this idea or I have this concern, you might say, hey, you can bring that to all of our attention in a formal way. So that exists as well. But I think there needs to be space also for, as Peter says, a less formal percolation of community input. Not that we would want to waste anyone's time, waste Kip's time by bringing it directly to him. But if someone has a fantastic idea, maybe something, I mean, I can't really think of any specific example, but like, oh, that's great. Let me mention it to everybody else. I think there needs to be room for things like that.
I think one of the ideas that came out fairly recently was somebody who wrote the board about our COVID-oriented child policy in the children's wing. And that letter instigated a review of the process and led to this. And so there are, I understand what Dale's talking about, because there is there should be some type of forum where we don't slot a person into a board meeting slot, because that's the only time we can take comment. And between that and a letter, there should be something else, but maybe that's something for us to try and, for Kip, you and your staff to think about, how could we do this? Is there a way we could do this so that you guys are efficient with your time, but we're also being able to take the comments and so forth, the ideas that people have? Is there another mechanism?
Certainly. I mean, just from being at the event at the Arts Center with the governor, I introduced myself to the community and said, my door is always open if you want to come and say hi or tell me about an idea. I had 2 people come by with ideas they would like to see. So it's just being available and letting people, how do you let people know you're available? And everybody in town, so you just, by nature, people are gonna want to talk to you. And I do agree there needs to be a mechanism to entertain that. I think it just needs to come with the understanding that you're sharing this idea, that doesn't mean that we're going to enact your idea.
Yeah.
So I'm hearing from what you just said, Kip, that you want to continue to be open to listening to what it is that people have to say. And I'm guessing that that's making sense to the members of the board here. So where I'd like to go next is, what is it that you as the members of the board have as an understanding of how you're going to operate when individually someone approaches you pressing a need or even with an idea for a new program? What is going to be the practice that you're going to have for handling those situations? And really what I'm thinking and want to encourage you to do is to not get into situations where as individual board members, you're acting on behalf of someone in the community, but you're more acting on behalf of the library to receive that information and to move that information into the appropriate channels of the library's work.
At the risk of talking too much, it really is a rehash of what you had said earlier, which was finding a conduit to inform the rest of the board members as well as Kip at the same time, so that no decisions are made in a silo. They're made as a group, because we can't operate as a board unless it's as a group.
Right. And the corollary for me, and this is coming from a lot of the board development work that I've done, is to help every board member understand you can't act independently. Your work is when you're seated together or when you're working in concert. Does that make sense to everyone? Any further discussion on that piece?
Well, I think that's a good point, and I think the danger of talking to someone who you agree with is to not respond as an individual, but to respond as the library. So they, thank you for telling me, let's talk about that further. Let's put you in touch with Kip. Let's maybe bring that up with my board members, see what it is, but not to sort of affirm or deny what you're hearing. Because you are only one person.
And you don't have the authority. The authority is there when the board is together. Any other discussion on that before we come back to the responsibilities document? So fiscal, we're making this distinction. The library director prepares the annual budget and does so in accordance with whatever guidelines are there. And then the board seeks adequate funds to carry out library operations and may assist in the preparation and presentation of the annual budget. Or does assist, it says. Discussion on this item.
I have had one budget cycle, and that was with an interim director. And she had far more experience at the Teton County Library than I. And her style was to put pretty much the I dots and T crosses on that budget and then bring me in as the treasurer to talk through what that was. And I was okay with that, but I was being a pretty particular financial oriented person, would have preferred slightly more engagement alongside that director if she had wanted that, but she didn't want it. And I did not feel in my role then as treasurer that I could do more than just say, I'm here if you need me. And this is an expertise that this is my experience that I can bring to this process, but I'm here at your request, not at my request for you. So it would be nice to have us, I think, be more participatory in that as it's being developed, as opposed to wait to get to the end product to discuss the nuances of the budget. Because it's just a complicated, we're a big enough entity, it's a complicated thing.
So what I hear you suggesting, Peter, is while the library director, as we're describing it here, we're saying prepares the annual budget, you see the value in the board being brought in early.
Yes.
Right. And if Kip has any problems with that, I presume he'll speak up.
I am used to a board not having any interest in contributing to the process. So I'm certainly open to input and assistance because this group certainly has some expertise that I would be lacking probably in budgeting. So I would welcome that.
That's great. Particularly where we're saying that the board's responsibility is to seek adequate funds. The more the board understands about how the budget's been developed and what the needs are that are driving it, the more effective they're going to be in their role.
Did you find it very valuable when it comes time for the presentation to the funding authority that the board be present? And oftentimes I have had boards that want to take the lead at that point because they may have different relationships with those funders than the director may have. And it has been helpful when the board is there present supporting that budget.
Well, yes, and we can't forget, we have two other funders that are important to the library, which are our friends and the foundation. So the bulk of our budget comes from the county taxpayers, but they are a very important addition to what we do.
Good
And
point.
it's a little bit different on those things, and I know, Kip, you've been working on more formalizing some of those mechanisms on funding as well.
So other comments on the fiscal, the distinction in the fiscal responsibilities?
I wonder, and I believe the board does have a role in the budget development in providing, and maybe the director begins the process by coming forward with it, but a set of assumptions and guidelines for the budget development that you agree on before the numbers get worked in too much detail, and that would occur early in the process, and that however it's generated, the director generates it, we agree to it, but assumptions and just basic premises that drive the budget, I think are important to understand and agree to at the very beginning. Agree that COVID's going to continue at this mode for the year. Go ahead and do the budget with that assumption. Assume that you're going to fully staff, or you're not going to fully staff, or, we've done a little bit of that in the past, and I think it was worthwhile. And so I just like to bring that out, that we agree on ground rules and assumptions early on in the process.
Great. Anything else in the fiscal area? So in advocacy for the library director, we're saying promote the mission of the library within the community, educate the board, friends, foundation, and community regarding local, state, and federal issues which affect the library. And then for the board, also promoting the mission of the library within the community and advocating for the library to elected officials. So comments, discussion on this set.
I would just add that advocate for the library to elected officials and the community,
Yes.
informal community, however you want to put that, but we need the community in there, I think.
Good. And remember, this is the place where I wanted to return to the point you were making earlier, Dale, where I think what I heard you say is that the board has a responsibility for advocating for people who can't be here. That's the phrase I wrote down. And it was the point at which you were including staff that made me want to be sure to come back to have all of you discuss this directly. And I'm wondering, Dale, do you want to repeat what it is that you said, the point you were making? Because I may not have done it well.
No, I just, I think it's probably one of the most important things we do is to be an advocate for the library. And in my mind, that's everything. That's knowing what's going on over here so that if somebody asks you, you can tell them. It's encouraging people to participate in the meetings like it's been brought up either through a public comment or letters or those kinds of opportunities, other meeting opportunities. I just think, and I think Kip really summed it up perfectly in terms of saying that we need to remain open. All of us need to remain open to the community, to hear the information, to share it with our colleagues, and to make people feel like they can talk to you about issues. I mean, that's how you get some of your best information and your best input is, I think a lot of times it's on an informal basis. And just to realize, like you emphasized, Maureen, that we're just part of the whole, and that's how we hear it, that's how we respond to the individual, and that's how we bring it forward to the group, that's our responsibility. But I don't think, I don't think anybody's confused about that. I mean, I really think we understand that, and maybe in a small town you get more input. I'm not sure about that, but it's one way to, you know, engender supporters for the library too, is being open to the community and so that they feel that they're heard. Even though nobody gets your way all the time, you know what I mean? But it's important for people to feel heard, I think.
Other reflections on this? Anything more to be said about advocacy? So I'll move us along to meetings, where it's expected both the director and the board will participate, but a distinction here is that the board has particular responsibility to collaborate with the Friends and Foundation on matters of mutual interest, and encouragement for you as board members to join the Friends and be a donor to the foundation.
I don't know what join the Friends means.
I'd just like to clarify that, if I may, we are all members of the Friends, because the Friends bylaws say that if you volunteer for the library, you are a friend of Teton County Library. There's no secret handshake, there's no dues, there's none of that. All you do is volunteer for the library and you're a member of the Friends. And the last time I looked, we were all unpaid volunteers, so on the library board. So we are already members of the Friends.
And I would like, just for a practical matter, to clarify, participate in a significant majority of board meetings. We have 12 a year, which is a lot. And my guess is people need to be able to feel like they can miss one or two for whatever circumstances that range from business conflicts to family vacations. But it's important. I just, all is 100% is a tough thing.
I think it says in the bylaws.
70, it's in the member expectations from the county, and it says 75% of regularly scheduled and special meetings.
I'm just correcting what's on this little blue chart.
So Peter, maybe the way to resolve this, because the bylaws will drive it, is to just remove all.
That's fine. I'm happy with that. I'm actually very happy.
I'd be interested in some clarification under the director column in ensuring that there's good communication from the board, the Friends and Foundation. How does that happen? Is it just a report if this is what's going on, or is it more active and saying, oh, you need to speak with this person? Like how much of that responsibility falls on Kip?
Kip, do you want to respond?
I would actually say that the establishment of the tri-board, having quarterly meetings, that sort of takes that off of the director's plate. Aside from me collecting the monthly reports from the foundation and the Friends that I included in the board packets.
And we had our first meeting approximately 10 days ago, it was week before last. And I'll be reporting on that first meeting to the board on Thursday. So Grace and I were there. The idea is it's the heads of all three boards and designate that each of the heads choose for each of these meetings, and then the library director. And it's going to be 4 times a year. The next meeting is in early December.
I think it's essential for the director to maintain like internal communications with each of those organizations and make sure that communication individually is good. But I think the tri-board takes care of this other piece.
So do other board members want to chime in here?
was just going to say, is the triangle need to be explicitly, or just the language here reflect that one?
I think this was something that Kip came up with prior to our first meeting at the tri-board. Maybe we can just revamp this. I mean, I'm not sure that this table's gonna be an operating document, but it helps to outline.
Yeah.
I think, yeah.
And one adjustment was made when the tri-board meetings were happening, because the earlier version talked about liaisons, which you don't have anymore. So in networking, the last item here for the
Before we leave meetings,
Sure.
I'm sorry.
go ahead, Grace.
I would like to strike the donor to the foundation. I feel like that puts it in there like it's something that I could be audited to. We donate to the library in many ways, our time, our energy, and this implies that I'm expected to donate money to the library. I think that's overstepping. I agree that we support the foundation, but how we do that, where my money goes, is my business, and I feel like this is an overstep here.
What do you think?
Well, it says consider becoming. It doesn't say you have to. I think most boards, nonprofit boards, it's a expectation that you donate to the board, to the organization, you know. So maybe that's how it kind of got in here, just because it's kind of a, you know, a normal expectation. I don't feel strongly about it one way or another, Grace, to tell you the truth.
I understand what you're saying there. I just would like it struck. Because I know it says consider it. But if someone I just don't think it belongs here.
Well, if it was in the BOCC requirements for a library board member, that'd be one thing, but it's not. But I mean, it doesn't bother me because we support the library through a lot of different ways, including our property taxes. Which is probably the biggest way. I don't know, but I understand your point, Chris, which is you don't want to feel the obligation. That's it. One doesn't want to necessarily have an obligation, whether it's yours or not. I'm not saying that it's yours or not.
So if we take Grace's suggestion that that phrase be struck, does anyone want to make the case that it should not be struck?
Well,
Stricken?
I would like to put some qualification on it that says to the extent possible, because I do think as a principle going forward, I would like to think we all would support the foundation. How that support comes through, whether it's a dollar contribution or volunteering at a library benefit or something else, there are lots of ways of doing it. So to make it somewhat broader as to how that contribution can come in, consider it, I think that's appropriate. But I don't want to wordsmith this if it's inappropriate.
They're changing the words to supporter of.
Yes.
Yeah.
That takes away financial.
Right, just take donor out of there. Yeah, use different, a little different.
Supporter of the foundation.
And Kip, I was going to suggest, Kip, that you and I can work on something. There are a couple changes that we're going to make in this document, and we can work on that. And would that be acceptable, Grace?
I'm good with all of that. That would be
Okay.
fun.
Thank you. Any other discussion on this document, the distinctions that have been made here? So before I move our discussion to focus on the shared responsibilities between the board and the director, Peter?
You want to talk about networking or not?
Oh, thank you. Of course I do. Thank you. Sorry, I was moving too quickly. Let's go back. We'll talk about networking. So the director is encouraging board, friends, and foundation to join state and national professional organizations, and the director makes the board members aware of educational opportunities. Whereas the library board responsibility is to join these organizations as a resource for policies, operation, and advocacy for libraries. So discussion points there.
I guess I maybe need some guidance as to specifically which organizations you think we ought to join or whatever, and why. A lot of individual memberships may not be useful. I'm fine with the concept. I'm not sure how to implement it.
But that's a good point, because what you're raising is the opportunity that is there at some future time for KIP to engage with you as a group, but also maybe some individual conversations about what would be of value based on what your interests are.
Okay.
KIP, did you want to add anything to that?
No, I think what you just said makes sense. I do try to, if something comes across my desk now, my email, I do share educational opportunities with the board members. United for Libraries just had a trustee conference, so I shared that, and I believe Dale and Grace both registered to attend that. So, yeah.
Well,
Any other-
Sorry, Ari.
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
Traditionally, and I think this is something the director can help with too. The library has had institutional memberships in the state organization and ALA, and that opens up a lot to the library board through that avenue. And I think it's important for the director and the board to be aware of those kinds of opportunities in terms of we're already paying to support those organizations for our staff also. You know, it's kind of a group, but the board is certainly able to access all of that information. And KIP is really good about zeroing in with certain emails, which I personally appreciate, because there's so much information out there that sometimes it's, you know, you lose track, or I lose track. I should only speak for myself, but anyway, I find that very helpful. But that is another avenue for all of us in terms of, you know, the library traditionally has been a member, so.
Any other discussion on networking? Any other discussion? And thanks, Peter, for reminding me of this, because there was something else I wanted to say before we move on to shared responsibilities. Is there any other point or discussion that you want to propose we need to have to ensure the clarity of the distinction between the two sets of responsibilities? Another way that I can put this is, have we had the discussion that you need to have as the board and as the library director to ensure that you're clear about who does what?
Well, I think you let this conversation go a little bit to the side, and you brought it up twice, and I'm not sure I understand this resolution of it, which is when I have a friend who's a staff member, and I get comments from that staff member, which I have a friend who's a staff member, I find myself with that Chinese wall in my head, trying to keep the library board hat on one side and the friend side on the other side. And I certainly would appreciate any insights you have into how to handle those kinds of things. Because as Dale said, we're in a small community. We have lots of friends in a lot of different places. And it's the thing I struggle the most with. And as Dale and I have had sidebar conversations, I tend to gravitate towards, you know, really refined lines because it helps me in being disciplined, and that's not really practical. So what would your suggestion be as to how we are operating in our day-to-day lives with several hats on?
So I'm very happy to have the opportunity to respond, and I'm going to do that. But I want to say this to board members before I respond. Listen to me, and if you disagree with what it is that I'm saying in response to Peter's question, this is a time to really bring this up, because this could be another one of those critical conversations to have. If any of you have a relationship with a member of the staff, and that staff person raises questions, expresses concerns, it's really important to say to that individual, I have a responsibility as a member of the library board to work in support of the library. You are raising an issue that you need to take directly to the library director. And I hope this does not happen, but I think there have been cases in the past from some of the research that I've done where a staff member would say to a board member, we've tried to resolve this with the library director and we weren't getting anywhere. Then you go to the board chair. But this past practice that some people have been engaged in on the staff, where they felt they could appeal to individual board members, I hope is stopping now that you've hired Kip, because it's really the library director's responsibility to work in support of the staff, to deal with staff issues that as they arise. And I know that Kip, because I'm talking to him on a weekly basis, is already working with the staff to help the staff understand when they have a problem or an issue, they need to take it directly to the person with whom they have that problem or issue. Is that responsive to your question, Peter?
I don't know, Peter, if that was responsive to your question, because I think there's more to it than that. I don't think that's all we probably should be talking about, but I don't want to get in the way of
No, go ahead.
help for you. And I'm not aware of that. In my tenure as a board member, that has not happened to me. I have not had any staff come to me and say, I can't get it through to anybody, and I'm telling you, that just hasn't happened. And I am, if I do stop and talk to staff, and I do, I'm very clear if I feel we're getting off track. I will be the first to say, you know what, I can't talk to you about that. You need to go to the director, or bring it to the board meeting, go to the director and then bring it to the board, but I can't individually talk to you about that. But I do think that what we need to remember in terms of our role is that we can be open to our staff, because I think there are things we can talk about. I think we can talk about library events and what is happening at the library. I think we can talk about some of the hardships and their feelings about COVID and what that has done in terms of their work. And I think we can talk about some of the joy they have in their job, that they're so happy that the outdoor summer reading, that reading for children has happened again. I mean, what I'm concerned about in terms of the board and the staff is that if there's no communication, or we're scared to death to communicate, it sets up an us and them dynamic. And that is very negative. And I don't think that's what we want.
Right.
And it's impossible to have in a small town. It's just like Peter says, we all have friends that work at the library. It's impossible not to talk to them about the library. I think it's incumbent upon us to be the first person to say, I can't talk to you about that, but you need to talk to the director, and then hopefully he will talk to us, But I do think there are all kinds of things we can talk about and should be talking about. And I think getting too, I don't know, I worry about that dynamic. You can't talk to the staff because you might make a mistake and dribble over into some sort of something that's not appropriate. I just don't believe most of us are going to do that.
So I think what I'm going to propose needs to happen is that there needs to be clarification as we're working on here. not only between the board's role and responsibilities and the library directors, but then the library director, Kip, has a responsibility to help the staff understand what your work is, and for the staff to recognize all of you want good relationships. You want the informal communication to happen, but when it's around library needs and issues, it needs to be conversation that staff are taking to the managers and to Kip. And then you figure out with Kip, which of those issues require your time and your engagement, if at all, if that makes sense. And Kip, you should feel free to chime in at any point here.
Well, as long as we're being open here, I would like to know from Kip if he finds it concerning or threatening to see us talking to his staff, to know that we're talking to him, given that we understand that we don't take actionable items. We make it clear to the people that, you know, I'm listening as a person to what you're saying. I can't take any action from your input. I'm interested in your circumstances, but it doesn't mean that I'm going to do anything about it. Does it bother Kip to have us talking to his staff?
If that's the approach, no, certainly not. I mean, to our community members, your friends, you should have conversations with them. And I mean, there are certain types of situations where it would need to be referred back to the director and let me take care of that or address that. But no, I would hope you're talking to staff. They don't want to see you as some whatever.
I'm glad to hear that. That makes me feel better.
I mean, you should feel welcome in the library. You should have conversations with folks and talk about library things. I mean, that's just what you're here for. So, but yeah, the things that require action need to be redirected appropriately.
Right, exactly. There's no decisions, there's no agreement, there's just awareness that they're getting us.
I've had situations where staff, one particular staff member repeatedly would go to a board member with an issue, and I was totally unaware of the issue. I can't address an issue if I don't know about it. Right? You can complain about it and, you know, try and get me in trouble or whatever, but you have to at least talk to me first. And I've had board members where they just made it a board issue and like they didn't refer it properly either.
So I'm wondering if you, Nina, or you, Sean, have anything you want to contribute?
I would just say, I agree with Dan. I think it's important. I also feel like all of us here are on the same page with this. I feel like it's important to be receptive to the sentiment of both staff and the community. And I feel personally that I have a very clear distinction that I can follow to say, okay, this is personal and that's professional, and there's a hard stop between these two. That's not a problem for me at all. And I get the feeling it's not a problem for anyone else here.
Great. Nina, anything? So I think what you're reaching as a conclusion here is the interaction with members of the staff is important because you value the interpersonal interaction and the relationships there, but also that you are going to continue to be very clear about what the content of the conversation is. And if it's anything around people's issues or concerns about their role as staff and things that should go to Kip, you're going to refer them to Kip. Did I capture that well for you?
Yes.
Because the other thing that's of interest to me in this is, being very careful to consider the perception that staff might have of you listening to a complaint, even when you say, go to KIP, I'm not going to do anything about it, giving people the opportunity to get into work issues with you as individual board members is something I think to really avoid. Because that's part of the administration of the library, the work that you've hired KIP to do.
You know, I just like to put a plug in here for the staff. I think almost without exception, staff is completely aware of that. I mean, I am very,
Good.
I have not been put on the spot a single time since I've been on this board, and we've had a lot of controversies and a lot of opportunities for people to put board members on the spot, and that has not, and I do talk to the staff because of course I know almost all of them, and that has simply not happened. And I truly believe, and of course, there's always that 2% that'll mess it up for everybody else. We know about that. There can definitely, you can have spoilers, but I think almost without exception, our staff is very aware of that line also. And I
That's
just
great.
like to get a little plug in there because that has been my experience in what could certainly be termed a difficult time on occasion. So I just want to be clear about that.
Yeah, and I think we have an incredibly professional staff. And again, my comment has less to do with this current seated board than it does to help future board members and who may not have that kind of knowledge coming in. And I guess at the risk of throwing another wrench in there, I'd add, maybe this is in the shared responsibilities, the particular role of media and our paper, our radio stations, etc., and how we interface collectively, or where that responsibility lies. It's not real. There's an advocacy piece on this, there's a networking piece on this, but the specifics of responsibilities is something that is unclear to me. Yes. I don't know whether that's appropriate for this session or next session or.
I actually think it's more appropriate for this session than the next one. And I'm going to propose and test it with all of you. I think we might turn our attention to this next. But before we do that, I just wanted to comment on what Dale just said, and it's my comments directed to Kip. I think Dale has just given you, Kip, a nice entree into a conversation you might have with the staff at some point about the boards recognizing the value of the interpersonal interaction, and also the board recognizing the professionalism of the staff on this issue. Does that make sense? And I do know from a conversation that I've had previously with you, Peter, that this question of dealing with the media, because there's a desire to be very effective in doing this, has come up. And you brought it up as possibly under the heading of shared responsibility. Can you say a little bit more about how you see that?
Well, I think the director operates the day-to-day library and is the face of the library. We are there to support that role, but how our role is involved with that, with the director and other media is unclear, I guess, is the way I put it. Because I think if I'll pick on the paper for lack of anything better, but you know, it would be in the reporter's best interest to get every one of us one-on-one and then compile the same questions and answers and see if he or she's got a consistent story. And that's probably not the way we want to go about things, nor does anybody in this room or Nina think that that's how, you know, we wouldn't accept that. But it's the greater policy of who is the interface and how does that work? And should there be a board interface in this process?
So I'm going to propose that that particular piece is probably a topic for a board meeting rather than this session. But what I think is appropriate as we're starting the list of shared responsibilities is that you do, as the director and the board, share the responsibility for ensuring that the public, as well as the media, have an accurate understanding. They have the facts about situations. Does that make sense? Is that acceptable?
Yep.
And does that make sense to you, Kip, that we would park for a future discussion how to clarify the distinctive responsibilities?
Yes, and I think it's so specific that we might get caught up for the rest of the session on that, so. Yeah, another time.
Well, I don't mean to hijack it, so it's timely.
So if we turn our attention to what you hold in common, what else would you put on the list of shared responsibility?
Making sure that either non or underrepresented parts of our community become representative. And I think we all have a responsibility. I mean, we've talked about it a little bit, but there, and I think Kip's mentioned this board meeting or two as well, but there are, with COVID, we have people that don't have access to the digital side of things in our community. We have we have language issues with beyond just Spanish. There are other native speakers of other languages. There are all sorts of underrepresented. And I think one of those shared responsibilities is to try and identify as many of those as possible. And that can lead to a discussion of what's practical in trying to address those needs. Because you can't address every, we have 2 Uzbekis that are speaking, that in their home. We can't necessarily have a whole program devoted to that, maybe, but just to at least identify what those issues are.
Great. So it's a shared responsibility to know the whole community, to serve the whole community.
Yeah.
Other thoughts?
Is it fair to turn the question around to you to say, what did you think of when you put that on the list?
Well, in fact, on page 20 of the handbook, there is a list of potential areas for shared responsibility. And I happen to have it as an aside here: to attend board meetings, to communicate openly and honestly with each other on a regular basis, to collaborate on the strategic planning process, to regularly evaluate community needs, advocate for the library, network, attend county commission and city council meetings as appropriate, work cooperatively with the Library Foundation and friends, participate in continuing education and training opportunities, and be familiar with the library's bylaws, as well as state and federal laws affecting the library. So maybe to make things easier for all of you, I can work with Kip on a review of the conversation that took place on the distinctive responsibilities, this list from the Wyoming handbook, and prepare a draft set of shared responsibilities for your review. Does that sound good? It's interesting. I really had put it aside, but when you asked the question, Peter, I pulled it, and it really does resonate with a lot of the discussion we had about the distinctive responsibilities. And I could only see Peter nodding that it was a good idea. Did everybody else
Yes.
agree? I can see nods now. I just couldn't quite tell, Dale, were you nodding in agreement?
Yes, no, I am, sorry.
I can only see you on this small bar across.
Sorry.
So I just want to acknowledge that we've got about a half hour remaining, but it seems to me we're coming to a place where it will make sense to conclude the discussion for this afternoon. Is there anything else anyone wants to bring up? Anything that we've missed, not discussed, that you think is important?
Everybody wants to end early.
I can't think of anything, although I will as soon as we quit, you know, that's how that goes.
Well, I think the discussion has taken you very far on the path to clarifying and really understanding the distinctive responsibilities, but also being ready to work together to accomplish what needs to happen, particularly in the next year. It was interesting to me early enough in the discussion where you were getting into the questions around how you were going to undertake some of this work and coming up with ideas that I'm sure Kip and you will want to pursue. So I'm ready to propose that we can close this session, and you'll get follow-up documents from Kip and me, revisions to the library director board responsibilities, but also a list of proposed shared responsibilities for your consideration. So the last question I have, does anyone have anything else you want to say? I like being able to conclude these kinds of sessions by saying you get a half hour back because of your good engagement in the meeting.
Well, I guess the only thing I would say, Maureen, is thank you very much for getting you and Kip sitting down to organize this.
Yeah. Well, it's a pleasure to work with him, and it's also a pleasure to work with all of you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You're going pretty far in terms of helping the library be an effective community resource going forward. It's wonderful. All right, thank you. And I'll follow up with Kip. Thanks so much.
I'd ask for a motion to adjourn the meeting.
So moved.
All in favor? All right. Any opposed? Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
If we call the order, I figure out how to.
Yeah, the equipment is excellent.
You know,
This worked really well.
at our meeting,